This is the Fantasy Football Unlimited podcast with your host, Kevin Murray.
Welcome to the Fantasy Football Unlimited podcast. On this episode, our guest is one of the most respected voices in fantasy football. He's a senior fantasy analyst at CBS Sports and co-host of the Fantasy Football Today podcast. It's the one and only Dave Richard. Welcome to the show, Dave.
Kevin, it's awesome to be here. Thank you for having me. We are very close to the NFL draft as we sit here. Is it like, I think we're in single digits in terms of days until the NFL draft. Humongous moment every year for fantasy football managers. I'm sure you're looking forward to it just as much as I am.
Oh, for sure. I mean, growing up, the NFL draft was a holiday to me. It was my favorite second favorite day of the year, second to Christmas. But the NFL draft has always been a huge part of my life. I love it more than anything because it's those stories. You know, it's the potential. It's like the spring training of football, where your team is going to get the right players and you're going to go all the way because of what happens at the NFL draft.
So in the NFL, there's two things that a team can sell. They can sell on winning or they can sell on hope. Yeah. And on draft weekend, they're all selling on hope. Only one team can really sell on winning. This year it's Philadelphia. But usually it's the teams that are, like Tennessee is going to say, we've got our quarterback of the future, is assuming they take Cam Ward. I think they are. We come out and support the Titans. We've got the best quarterback in the draft, that type of thing. When they are able to sell on hope, that's, the best they can do because they're not winning teams. But those are the two things that teams sell on and draft weekend. That's why it's like the Super Bowl for all the teams that don't make the Super Bowl, because they're all selling hope and showing that there's upside and promise and potential and all those fancy words that really don't mean anything on draft weekend.
Well, it's a beautiful time of year, and I'm excited to have you on here. Obviously, love talking prospects, but I really want to share your story with our listeners and viewers. For people that are unfamiliar with your work, I don't know how they would be, but what are your current roles with CBS?
Head janitor. Assistant lunch guy. No, you can insert a fact check there. I've been a fantasy football writer for CBS since 2005. So that tells me it's about 20 years because I'm good at simple math. And it's been an amazing ride, but something has changed this offseason, Kevin. And I haven't really talked about it that much on our podcast or anywhere else. I've been added to the NFL draft team on CBS Sports, not the fantasy team, not the dynasty team or anything like that. The NFL draft team, where I'm writing a lot of the prospect profiles that you'll read on CBS Sports. I'm diving into the film. I'm researching the players, and I'm really only focusing on players that are, fantasy relevant. They don't want me looking into Abdul Carter, for example. They don't care what the fantasy guy has to say about Abdul Carter, but the quarterbacks, running backs, receivers, tight ends. I'm part of a team that's writing those profiles and coming up with rankings and doing all that fun stuff that was normally reserved for other draftniks on CBS Sports. So it's been a really fun and really challenging offseason doing that instead of, getting ready for the fantasy season of 2025. I'll have time to do that after the draft, and that'll be kind of a crunch for me. But it's been a role change. It's been exciting. And obviously it's a big puzzle piece with fantasy football because the Cam Wards and Tyler Warrens and Ashton Genties of this draft class are going to matter for fantasy football managers moving forward.
Well, what a thrill. Congrats on that honor. I love, when fantasy trailblazes into the mainstream, and obviously you've done a great job with your role with CBS, but that is such a cool opportunity for you. Very thrilled for you on that. Now, obviously CBS has done a lot for fantasy over the years. What is it you believe made CBS such a go-to fantasy hub for people over the years?
Well, you can start with the analysts being good at what they do. And I would imagine that the proof of that is in the longevity of who we've got and who contributes to our content. So Heath Cummings is one of our fantasy analysts. He is our most recent tenured analyst. He's been working at CBS for over 10 years now. He's our most recent tenure.
Wow.
All right. So he's been around a very long time. I beat Jamie Eisenberg by 1 year. So I've been working on the fantasy department for 1 year longer than Jamie Eisenberg. Adam Azer, who's the host of our podcast, and he definitely does a lot of great fantasy analysis on his own. He's been with the company since before 2010. I don't know exactly the year. He would be able to tell you. But we've been around for a long time, and the podcast has a good following. I know that there's people who've listened to the podcast and they go, these guys burned me in a fantasy league and they leave, but more people stay than go. And our numbers suggest that not only do they stay during the football season, they're with us during the off season. And I don't think they're listening to us because we're all funny and, we talk about our favorite, TV shows or anything like that. They're diehard fantasy football managers and they want to win their league. And we want to help them win their league. So we care about that kind of thing. Some fantasy analysts, they don't care about them. But, we answer questions on our show. We answer emails, tweets, etc. Like, we're there for them. And we like being available. And I think that's also part of the reason why our content is successful is because people know, hey, I've got a question. I can reach out to Fantasy Football Today to get an answer. I mean, my damn email address is in my X profile, Kevin. So people tell me, and I do my best to get back to people. I can't always do it. Definitely don't do it on Sundays during the football season, but I try. I want to be available. So we care about our audience. We want to see them win. We've been doing this for a long time, and we try and have fun doing it. And again, we're not going to sit and try and be the most entertaining show ever, but we're also not going to be the most boring show ever. And our shows, they might last 45 minutes, 55 minutes, 65 minutes. I'm long-winded, as you can tell, but it's usually a good time when we get together and talk fantasy and kind of come to some agreements and disagreements over what we think is going to happen in a given week, month, season, decade when it comes to fantasy football. The other part about our content is that it's free. So a lot of people, want to charge for fantasy analysis, and sometimes that analysis is very good. We do not. All of our content, all of our tentpole content from stardom, situm to Heath's player position analysis from week to week, my matchup data from week to week. It's all been free for the entirety of its existence, and it's not going to change.
Well, you certainly have, obviously created quite a following over the years. Do you ever have fans that are too obsessed? For example, people like Joey Wright.
Joey has actually become a contributing member of the fantasy industry. So he turned his obsession into a career. I'm thrilled for Joey. I had an interesting experience recently where I went to dinner with my wife, and she and I like to eat at the bar because we can watch a game at the bar. She thinks the service is faster at the bar. We sit down, and immediately as we sit down, the guy next to me says, "Hey, I know who you are, and I've met you at this restaurant before." And I don't mind. I don't mind when people kind of talk to me, but I kind of want to be left alone when I'm eating. And he was always kind of talking and then talking to his wife, and then he'd come back and talk to me and then talk to his wife. And my wife was like, when's this guy ever going to shut up? Because he's talking to my husband. I want to talk to my husband. Food is served. I'm starting to eat. For the record, I had a salad. And I'm starting to eat, and the guy starts telling me about his dog. And at some point, I'm like, well, how do I kind of let this guy know that, I'm trying to eat and spend some time with my wife and, don't need to hear about your dog. So there are some times where fans get maybe a little too excited. Still a great guy, still someone I would talk to again, just not while I'm eating. There are stories like that. I don't know how much time we've got and how far we're going to go with this, but I can tell you the most extreme experience, and I'll make it quick. I'm driving home from work one day. I'm absolutely in pain. My stomach is killing me. I think I might be having an appendicitis. I might need emergency surgery. Instead of driving home, Kevin, I go right to the emergency room. I go into the emergency room, fill out papers. I tell them what's going on. They immediately put me on a gurney, move me in the back. They pull the curtain. After they pulled the curtain, they said, Mr. Richard, you've got to get undressed, put on the gown. I'm thinking I'm about to have major surgery. A nurse walks in, opens the curtain, closes the curtain, turns around, looks at me. I'm in a gown. I'm literally wearing a gown. There's nothing else on this body. Thank God for the gown. He turns around and looks at me and he goes, Mr. Richard, I am such a huge fan. You've helped me win so many fantasy football leagues. I cursed at him. It was probably the only time I cursed at somebody for coming up to me and saying they're fan. Like I'm literally doubled over in pain wearing no clothes, and you're telling me how big of a fan you are of mine. I'll talk to you when I'm out of surgery, bud. Thank you very much. It was very, very crazy and very, very weird. Yes, these things do happen even to nerdy fantasy football writers.
That's awesome.
I would imagine that guy was probably crossing the line of obsession.
I love it. Well, yeah, shout out to Joey Wright. Again, he's a huge fan of yours, and obviously he's the community ambassador at Football Guys, doing a lot of great things in the fantasy community. So love to hear those stories for sure.
And Joey's never seen me in just a gown.
That's a good thing. Now you have clear passion for sports. When did that develop for you? And who are some of your favorite teams and players across the sports spectrum growing up?
I grew up in Chicago. Born and raised Chicagoan for the first 18 years of my life. And I grew up when the 85 Bears won the Super Bowl. My dad went to the Super Bowl with my grandfather. They owned Chicago from 1985 until this guy named Michael Jordan came around in the 1990s and really put himself on the map. Bulls won a few championships. I've got some of the rings behind me. So Walter with the Bears, Michael Jordan with the Bulls, Frank Thomas with the White Sox. I'm a White Sox fan, for better or for worse. Those would probably be the three Chicago players. And of those teams, I'm still really only just a White Sox fan, not really into the Bulls, definitely not into the Bears as a fan. And those would probably be the three guys. And listen, when you grow up in Chicago, when the Bears are awesome, you want to go and play sports and you want to be Walter Payton or you want to be Mike Singletary. When you play basketball, everybody wants to be Michael Jordan. And when you play baseball, everybody wants to be Frank Thomas or somebody on the Cubs. I don't know who any of those guys are, but you get my point.
Yeah.
And so, I always loved to play sports because it was fun. It's what all my friends did. I wasn't necessarily like dying to compete, and I certainly wasn't very good at sports, but I did love to play, all those sports. And growing up in Chicago and having those guys to kind of idolize and try and emulate when you're just hanging out at home was always something I did.
Well, I can appreciate that. As a Seattle fan, things were kind of bleak during that time. So I had to look nationally, and obviously the Bulls, Jordan was everything, in sports. 85 Bears was the first season that I was tracking football as a young kid. And so that was like my first favorite team, like Walter, like the personalities. I loved that squad. So I always, I loved the Ditka and the Peyton and Jim McMahon, and that defense was as good as it gets. Absolutely. I love my LOB though. But the 85 Bears, incredible. And Frank Thomas, I was, first baseman, loved baseball. Baseball was my passion. Frank Thomas was my guy. Griffey and Frank Thomas.
Yeah,
so
Griffey was amazing for sure. And Griffey and Frank kind of came up at the same time.
Yeah, into
the major league. So where do you rank those elite Seattle defenses on the list of like all-time great defenses?
I mean, I'm gonna say, easy say top 5, right?
Because I would agree.
What they did over that stretch was incredible, unmatched. 85 Bears were incredible, but they didn't have the run that the LOB had. Bias would give I lean towards 85 Bears as the number one defense, just because that was the one that I loved the most, throughout my childhood. Then I put LOB right there. I put them above, the Ravens defense or the Bucks defense or some of the others. There was obviously
Steelers.
Broncos had Well, okay. I'll let my bias speak. I'll say 85 Bears, LOB, and then the Steelers of the late 70s.
Yeah,
How about that?
LOB might be 4th or 5th for me.
Okay,
I love the 2000 Ravens, and don't tell anybody in Chicago this, but they might be better than the 85 Bears. Okay. So those are 1 and 2. I better say the Bears first. And some of those Steelers steel curtain defenses were just unforgiving, just absolutely dominant in the 70s.
Well, how much of your bias towards those Ravens are associated with Ray Lewis? Because again, the world knows you were a Miami Hurricanes fan. It's well documented. What inspired you to attend there, and how did that Ray Lewis connection lead to your respect for that Ravens defense?
Sure. Well, and it's not just Ray. You've got to remember that Ed Reed is also a Miami Hurricane turned Baltimore Raven, and Ed is my all-time favorite Miami Hurricane. So I have to throw that in there. Okay, so I grew up in Chicago, and when I was 15, I 16, I figured out that I just wanted to be a screenwriter, and I wanted to go to Hollywood and write movies and make movies, and that was where I wanted to go. I didn't apply to any colleges anywhere near Chicago because I kind of felt like going to college was like a 4-year semi-vacation, just a chance to see a different part of the country. I didn't think I'd be very homesick. And the only school that I got into, the only film school I got into without a waiting list was Miami. And the one that I always thought I would go to was Southern Cal. I was put on their wait list. I didn't want to wait. So I committed to Miami, and that's how I ended up there. It was an amazing time, except by the time I was done, Kevin, I didn't want to write movies anymore. I had lost my passion for it, and my passion was much more geared towards sports, football. And I graduated and I went back home and I started my own sports memorabilia business. And this was at the time when the internet was just becoming a big thing and no one really knew what to make of it. And I would go to like sports card shows and, autograph signings and all that stuff. And I'd be able to get stuff cheap there, go home, put it on the internet and sell it for double, triple more than what I would be able to get for it in Chicago. And you just mail it out. And it was lucrative for a while. And then once like eBay kind of started to grow and develop and other people started to do it, I felt like I was losing my advantage in that marketplace. And I knew that it wasn't going to be long term. And that's when I had to go and look for something else. But Miami was just great for, feeding my football fandom, and made a ton of friends, and obviously loved Miami so much that I ended up coming back to live here a couple of years after I graduated.
It's amazing. Yeah, what was it like to just be at such a storied program with football? Obviously, it was a transition kind of era when you were there, correct?
Yeah, it wasn't the heyday that it was in the 80s and early 90s. I started there in 94 and graduated in 98. So I was there when they were when they, ran into a bunch of trouble. The first time they ran into a bunch of trouble, and that really sucked. But I was never exposed to the college football experience in Chicago. I mean, there's Notre Dame, but outside of Notre Dame, there is no great college football program in the Chicagoland area. Sorry, Northwestern, you're not it. And Michigan and Michigan State and Ohio State, they're too far away to really get into it. And I never went to any Notre Dame games. I was never really a Notre Dame fan. And so that was my first experience going, for tailgating, and, college kid going to tailgate, you can imagine what that was like. And the games were at the Orange Bowl, which is this amazing, old school stadium that was just, it was a dump, but it was our dump. It was one of those kinds of things. Like maybe you might've thought of the Kingdome the same kind of way, Kevin. Like no one else really appreciated it, but you definitely did. That's how I felt about the Orange Bowl. And the teams, when I got there, like Sapp was still there when I was a freshman, and that team was competitive in 1994. They were very close to winning the Natty that year. But I think they finished third, and there was just no way for them to get to first. And then after that, things started to go south for the program, but it was still a popular program. They still had great players. It was still something to do. We all loved Arcane's football. I'm saying it past tense like they're gone. They are not. They were very good this past year, just not quite good enough to make the college football playoff because they couldn't tackle. But the bottom line is that that really just going to those games, going to that whole experience. And then when you're on campus, these players are on campus. It's not a big campus. I'd see Ray Lewis walking around to and from classes. Yes, he went to class, and I saw him walking around all the time when I was there. Sapp too. And so it was very cool to be up close and personal with a program it wasn't exactly the National Football League, but it was pretty close to it.
Yeah, no, definitely a storied program. I mean, that would have been a really neat experience for sure. Now, when it comes to playing fantasy, when did you discover fantasy sports, and what kept you playing?
Oh, man. So that also started when I was at the University of Miami. And like every freshman dude who goes to college, he finds his way to the world of gambling. And back in the 90s, listen, you can't bet on your phone in the 90s. because there was no phone. There were no iPhones back then. The internet was barely a thing back then. So we used to get these parlay cards, and it's, like an index card, maybe like twice as long as an index card, had all the college football games and spreads on them. You pick 10 games, you give $10, and if you win, you get like $500. And like the odds sucked, and it's essentially a 10-team parlay. And even if you miss one game, I think you get like $200 if you get 9 out of 10. Well, I would do those, and I would lose every week. And eventually I found a bookie and started to bet with the bookie, and I'd lose every week. And so a couple of years later, somebody comes up to me and says, you want to join our fantasy football league? And I say, well, what's fantasy football? They explained to me what it is. And as soon as I heard that you could win money playing fantasy football, sure, of course I'm in. And little did I know I was a patsy for this league. So I remember being in the league. It was 97. Barry Sanders was my first pick. My team sucked. I think I got 3 wins all year long. And like for 3 years, I was hooked because I wanted to win, but I never won. And right around soon after I joined CBS in 2000, I told myself, all right, look, if I don't win fantasy this year, I'm going to quit forever. But what I'm going to do is spend the entire offseason tracking every move, trying to figure out why the move was made, getting, quotes from the coaches to learn what they liked about a player or didn't like about a player. And then I've got my own rankings, my own depth charts, my own everything. This is before fantasy content was everywhere. And if I can't win after this, then I'm never going to play again. And I won. And so then I knew what I had to do to be a good fantasy football manager, paying attention year round and really getting in deep and being passionate and, obsessed about the NFL and the players in it for my fantasy benefit. And that's really what I preach now to this day, is that there are all kinds of people they'll join a fantasy league, they'll grab a magazine or they'll download a PDF file on their way to the draft, and they'll go off of that in the draft, but they won't spend the time during the off season or on draft weekend to really digest what's happening around the league with each team. You've got to be way into it to do such a thing, but that's how you win. That's how you're competitive in your fantasy league. And it doesn't matter if you're in a league with a bunch of sharks or in a league with your buddies back home. Someone in your league is doing that. And if you want to win at your league, you've got to do that too.
I love it. That's a good message for sure. Now, do you have a primary league, like one league that's the most important league to you?
It's that league that started in 1997, Kevin.
Wow.
So that league is still going on. It's obviously people have come and gone from the league, but it's mostly a league of fraternity brothers of mine, relatives of mine, high school buddies of mine, and buddies of those guys in high school, or of my high school friends, their friends. And it's still going on. It's a keeper league now, but it's a fun league, competitive league, decent money. I won it last year. I was one of those teams that had a terrible record and eked into the playoffs. Actually, I don't think I eked into the playoffs. I think we won our division with like an 8-6 record and on a tiebreaker. So we got the bye. So now we're one of the final 4 teams, and we just got hot at the end of the year and we won the league. So isn't that how it always is? Like the team that's the 1 seed and they're always like dominant. They always fizzle in the fantasy playoffs. And the team that really like they barely belong in, they're the team that goes on and wins. So that's the league that I would call that my home league. And I've been playing in it in some form or fashion since 97. It's a long time.
That's incredible. Yeah. How about CBS leagues? I'm sure you're in a lot of those. How competitive are those? And who's your biggest rival in your fantasy leagues?
I got to pick one rival.
One rival.
I got 3 rivals. You can probably guess who they are.
Oh yeah, there you go.
No, I mean Jamie and Heath and Adam and I, like, we're not really going to trash talk each other that much when it comes to the league, especially because we're in so many leagues together as it is. Jamie's a psycho. Jamie's in like 30 fantasy leagues. It's like I'm kind of wondering if he's got a problem because he's in so many fantasy leagues. I'm trying to cut down and he's ramping up. So that just tells you how passionate he is about fantasy football. We all love to beat each other and have bragging rights over each other. Heath beat me in our dynasty league in the playoffs this past year in the semifinals, and that still stings that he beat me. So those guys are the guys that I want to beat, and they want to beat me, and it's always in good fun. But it's always better when you win and you can take them down a little bit. We've got a bunch of competitive leagues at CBS. Probably we've got one league that's the Dynasty League is probably it. So Heath started a Dynasty League, I want to say like almost 10 years ago, but pretty soon after he started with CBS. Let's call it 7 years. And I've won it a couple of times. Nice. Jamie's won it a couple of times. Now Heath's won it a couple of times. So we kind of take turns dominating over other people that work for CBS, are in the league, but aren't necessarily fantasy guys. And it's a blast. That's a good one. And we just started a different Dynasty League. Listen to this. Okay. So this time last year, the sports betting guys, we've got this whole site, cheap plug time, Kevin. We have a sports gambling analysis site called Sportsline. And it's $10 a month. You get all the picks. It's the best tout service deal that you'll ever have. And it's like 50 people giving their picks on all sports, not just football. And it's $10 a month. It's unbeatable. So those guys came to me and they said, we're starting a Dynasty League. We'd really love to have you in it. Would you consider joining? And again, I'm trying to cut down on my leagues. And I decided to join their league. And it's only my second Dynasty League. And I won the league this past year. First year, nice. Won the league, did the exact same thing where I had no business being in the playoffs, and I went on a sick run. And I built the team with a bunch of veterans, but also getting, Brock Bowers, Marvin Harrison. I traded for Jamison Williams. So Anthony Richardson's my quarterback. That's not so great right now, but like my team was built to win and have pieces in place for the future. And it's tight end premium, by the way. So I'm thrilled that I was able to take down that league. And that was for more money than the Dynasty League. So, yeah, we play fantasy for the exact same reasons everybody else does. It's fun to be the boss. It's fun to beat your friends. The money ain't bad either.
I love it. Now, we all love fantasy for sure. And it's that thrill, it's that chase of that championship for sure. Now, obviously, on the professional side, you broke into CBS thanks to pro wrestling. Like, how did you go from pro wrestling to pro football?
All right. So this is a crazy story. And it's kind of a long one, but I'll tell it. While I was doing that sports memorabilia thing online, I was way into wrestling in the late 90s, and WWF was like crazy popular back then. And I won a contest to be a columnist for like a small time wrestling site. It was called like AAA Wrestling or something. Oh, the People's Wrestling website, TPWW. And I won a contest to be a columnist. I went by Downtown Dave, and I'd write a weekly column. After I had started doing that, I met a girl. I was living at home with my parents. It's kind of embarrassing, but whatever. I was 22. The girl wanted me to get a real job so I could move out, and then she could move in with me. You could tell where her intentions were. So I started applying for jobs, and CBS Sportsline had a job at the time. At the time, they were called CBS Sportsline. Had a job opening for like an assignment desk editor. And I thought, well, I could do that. That seems pretty easy. And I applied for the job. And I thought to myself, well, do I put this wrestling column that I'm doing on my resume? And I thought, yeah, why not? It's something that's work related. It's certainly like journalism, content, communications related. Yeah, throw it on there. The next day, I get a phone call from their human resources saying, Mr. Richard, we got your resume. It's very interesting. We actually have another job opening being a content producer for our wrestling website called WrestleLine.com. Would you be interested in that job instead? And I said, sure. Is that a better job than the assignment desk editor? And the HR lady said, by many, many thousands of dollars. So I got an interview, flew down to Fort Lauderdale. Some of the people that I talked to on that interview still work for CBS to this day, and I got the job. And so my foot in the door with CBS Sports was through WrestleLine.com. I wrote for them, produced content for them, ran the website for them. And pro wrestling was a pretty good kind of like learning ground for professional football in the year and a half that I worked for WrestleLine.
That's incredible. That's amazing. Now, obviously, all these years later, what's been the most rewarding part of your experience just working in fantasy, working with CBS, and just being a part of this industry?
Definitely helping people win their fantasy leagues. That's the most rewarding part for me. I listen, like obviously having a salary and all the benefits and all that stuff, CBS has put food on the table for my family. That goes without saying. And I think everybody kind of expected that. But at the end of every season, and it's not just me, it's everybody on our crew, we get posts and emails and all this stuff from people thanking us. Hey, I finished in first in 2 of my leagues. I finished third in the other. Couldn't have done it without you guys. We get reviews on our podcast where people say, I won for the second year in a row. Before I found your podcast, I never won my league. Now I'm winning all the time. Couldn't have done it without you guys. That is rewarding. And like I said earlier, man, like that's the kind of thing that really fuels us. We love that stuff. We love being able to help people beat their friends at fantasy football because it means a lot to them. And just to have that little role in their life, like they're setting the lineups, they're putting the players together. We're just giving suggestions along the way. But even if one of those suggestions really helps, like it means everything to us that we're able to do that. And to me, that's part of to me, that's everything. Like I love that part of my job and helping people feel good about their fantasy teams.
Well, you gotta love the fantasy sports community. It's a passionate group, and how much has the community meant to you over the years?
Oh, it's huge. We'd be nothing without them. Think about it. We're not doing a job that's meant to help like executives at CBS or, working in a service industry where, well, I guess the service industry, you're helping customers and stuff like that. Like we're obviously helping, not that they're customers, the podcast is free, the content is free, but we're helping these people with their fantasy leagues. And without the community, even when they're, telling me they're big fans when I'm eating dinner or in the emergency room, like they're obviously crucial to what we do. And if we were doing things wrong, we wouldn't have a community caring about what we have to say. So that goes hand in hand with what I talked about before. Like it means everything to us. And I should also say that obviously in a fantasy football, listen, one person wins a fantasy league every year. So there's 9 people, 11 people, 13 people in every league that don't win. It's kind of like the Super Bowl. And we never hear from those people. They never write us and say, hey, I came in 5th place. Thanks for your help. Can't wait for next year. Like we don't get that, but we know they're out there and we also work for them. And we want to help them bounce back and go from last place to first place. We don't want our listeners having to do the 24-hour Waffle House challenge.
Well, obviously, it's been an incredible career helping people in the fantasy community. But when it comes to the industry, a lot of people don't know that there's a Hall of Fame for fantasy sports. You're on the selection committee. What's that process like for you?
Challenging. It's very challenging. So, like, first of all, when I tell people that there's a Fantasy Sports Writers Hall of Fame, they're like, "What? Are you serious?" Like, they already think it's a joke that I'm a fantasy analyst and that it's a real job. And now there's a Hall of Fame for it. But there is, and it's just a way to acknowledge the people who have done something amazing to help people in fantasy. And I think there's 6 of us on this committee, and every year we get together toward the end of the season to evaluate people in our industry who are deserving to be in the hall. And what does that mean? What does it mean to be deserving? Usually it means they've contributed something significant to the fantasy community over the course of 10 plus years in fantasy football. So there are so many people that are deserving who have been writing about content year after year, who come up with new and unique ways to convey their thoughts on the NFL for fantasy. These are people who give back to their communities. They give back maybe nationally to a charity of some sort. They win competitive fantasy football leagues. They innovate in the fantasy space. When they kind of check off all those boxes, that's when they really get attention into the FSWA Hall of Fame. This past year, Mike Clay got in. And Mike is someone that we've talked about, Kevin, as just an amazing analyst. And you think about Mike, he grew from working on smaller sites to Pro Football Focus to getting recognized as someone who can make a difference for ESPN. And now he's one of the lead guys on ESPN. His projections have been a staple in the fantasy landscape for well over 10 years. And he continues to innovate and inform and entertain people while also dominating expert leagues and and doing things in his community. And he was one of the people that we recognized as being somebody worthy of the Fantasy Hall of Fame. And every year we've got to go to, Zoom meetings with people who are on the committee and make cases for other guys who are deserving of being in the Hall of Fame. And we have very limited spots. We don't want everybody to get in every year. And there's very selective voting, and really only like one or two people get in every year. And eventually people who aren't in the Hall of Fame are going to get in, but they all want to get in as soon as they possibly can. And I've been on that end of it too, where I had to wait like 10 years to get into the Hall of Fame. And then when it finally happens, it's pretty cool when it does. But it's one of those kind of dorky things that might mean a little bit more to people in the industry than the people out of the industry. But I think everybody can agree that when somebody in our industry is recognized for the work they've done over their careers, that's an acknowledgement that, deserves, a standing ovation, or whatever the equivalent is of a standing ovation on the interwebs.
Well, yeah, there's some incredible people in the fantasy industry. You see a lot of them at the Kings Classic in Canton, Ohio. You get the Fantasy Football Expo every year. We talk about community. We talk about the industry. It all kind of meets together in Canton every summer now. August, you get this Expo event. You've obviously been a part of the Kings Classic, which is kind of where the Expo launched from.
Yes,
what's that been like?
Bob Long put that together.
What's that been like for you? The being a part of the Kings Classic and competing against these Hall of Famers and legends of industry.
Yeah, that's one of the most competitive leagues. I mean, I'm surprised I didn't think about that when I was talking about my competitive leagues earlier. Yeah, that's a league that I always want to win. And it's always two leagues. We do two drafts in the Hall of Fame every summer. One is a snake draft, one is an auction. And it's, I'm the guy representing CBS, so I better be bringing my A game every single one of those drafts. And they're tough to win, man. It's 14 team leagues, tough rules, deep benches. You suffer too many injuries and you're toast. It's just one of those things. Let's put it this way. I think we've been playing for like 6 years. We've been doing Kings Classic, maybe 7 years. And I've won one league. And a lot of people have been in there and they've never won a league. And there's relegation and there's all kinds of stuff that like is tough. It's a tough league. But getting together in Canton and having people, not only like writers and creative people in the fantasy industry, but also fans in the fantasy community, people that love and care about fantasy football, all converging at the Hall of Fame every August. It's awesome. It's really, really something that I hold dear to my heart. I love going every year. Bob Long has been the guy that's really put it together and kept it afloat. And it's something that's truly special. And I really wish that more people would come to the Kings Classic drafts and just watch the drafts, go to the Fantasy Expo after the drafts. That's usually the day after, if I'm not mistaken, and just kind of take it all in, meet other fantasy fans. If you can live anywhere in the world and go to Canton, Ohio, it's an hour's drive from Cleveland. But if you're especially in the Midwest and you're willing to take that drive to Canton, you should do it if you love fantasy football, because it's a great experience to kind of see everybody that you know. Everybody's very approachable. And as an added bonus, you get to hang out at the Hall of Fame, which is really just one of the coolest places on earth.
For sure. And it's so entertaining. I got to run that draft board for you guys a couple years ago, and especially the auction draft. I mean, if you want entertainment, just get in that room, because it's hilarious, it's intense, it's fun, it's for sure.
Yeah,
for sure. Now, obviously, a lot of people that go to the expo are content creators. Obviously, they want to, attract more consumers as well. A lot of content creators are there, trying to make it in the industry. Do you have any advice for people that do want to get more involved in fantasy football content creation?
Yes. The number one thing you have to do, and this is easy for me to say, but it's really difficult to do, is find your hook. Find something that's different than what anybody else is doing. What it took for me to realize that was creating the trade chart. And that was almost 15 years ago when I invented the trade chart. And now there are trade charts all over the place. I think it's amazing. It's just a great resource for people to lean on for their fantasy football trades. And it actually like creates trade discussion in leagues. It makes people less afraid to make trades. But I had to come up with that. And that was part of my hook as a fantasy analyst. Is now I'm the trade guy, and here's something that I put out every Tuesday during the football season to help people make fair trades in their leagues. Commissioners use it. It's been a blessing to have done that. But if you're creating content, you've got to do something different that nobody else is doing. And as long as you do that, and it doesn't have to be necessarily content related, it could be the way you present the content. It could be how you present yourself. As long as you're doing something that's different and something that's appealing, don't be the fantasy football booger guy where you pick your nose after every, like that's gross. Like no one wants to watch something gross, but people would definitely want to watch something that's innovative and interesting and different. That's the key. You've got to be different. And as long as you're doing something different, then you've got a shot to make it and turn it into a career in fantasy football. Joey Wright's a great example of that. And we've talked about him earlier on this Q&A. But Joey created like this very funny series of videos where he would be doing something, but talking fantasy football while he's doing it. So like he'd pretend to be an explorer and he'd go to the local zoo or the local, forest preserve, and he'd walk around and, he'd point out bugs. And then he'd say, something that's bugging me is Marquez Colson has been terrible in 3 straight weeks. I think it's going to be 4 in a row. Like it just very silly stuff. It's almost like he's a filmmaker. Yeah. But it was so different than what everybody else was doing. And that's how he got his foot in the door. And now Joey has embraced this wacky side of his personality, which I think he's pretty much had his whole life. And it's turning him into one of the great content creators at Football Guys. And so that was his hook. And as long as you're doing something different and unique, you're making yourself unique, you're going to be great. And then the other thing I would tell you is, be interactive with your audience. That's something that's also been with me really from the second that I got into fantasy football in 2003. You've got to be available for your audience and able to answer their questions. Let them know that you're out there. Let them email you. You answer questions on X or on Blue Sky or wherever, on YouTube comments. Man, sometimes I'm in YouTube comments for our shows answering people's questions. As long as you make yourself available and have, friendly conversation, you're endearing yourself to your audience. You're proving to them that you care about them, and they'll stick around, especially if your advice is good.
That's great. Great advice for sure. Let's switch gears. Let's talk about football. Football obviously brings us together. Let's talk about the draft that's coming up. Can you give me a player that you love for fantasy, a player that you don't love for fantasy, and a sleeper at each of the relevant positions ahead of the draft?
Players that are in the draft?
Yeah.
Okay. So like you don't want guys that have been in the NFL.
No.
Sure. Well, I mean, the guy I love at running back is Ashton Genty.
Okay.
That dude's pretty amazing. I think that Quinshon Judkins, like, I don't know how much of a sleeper he is, so that's kind of a lame answer. But I would say that he's somebody who I think he could end up being the second best running back for fantasy in this draft class. I'm really a big fan of his talent, and he's been playing well and running well for 3 years, 2 different programs, just like a really, really good player and high character guy as well. And then the one that I'd probably be nervous about at running back and might not draft to any of my teams is Johnson from Iowa. Just I'm not sure if he can be more than like a 2-down back in the NFL. He's really going to need a great landing spot for him to be a good stat producer. So those would be the 3 at running back. At wide receiver, if we're counting Travis Hunter, he would be the one that I would love the most at wide receiver. If we're not counting him, then I think it's Ted McMillan. But I can really the guy that there's 2 guys I love. There's 3 guys I love as sleepers. Both of the Iowa State receivers, Jaden Higgins, Jalen Knoll, and then Jack Besh from TCU. I got to see all 3 of these guys up close at the Senior Bowl, and I think all 3 of them can play, and they're all kind of different from each other. Higgins especially, the dude's 6'4". He's got Velcro hands. I think he can end up being a good route runner. He's just not a burner. If he was a burner, he'd be a first-round pick. But we've seen plenty of NFL receivers play great and dominate without necessarily having like sub 4.4 speed. So I'll call him my sleeper, but I like Noel and Besh a lot too. And then a receiver that I'm not like crazy about. I'm not crazy about Luther Burden. I know that he's very athletic, but I'm worried that he could be pigeonholed into a role that might not necessarily mean a ton of targets for him. I don't know if he's ever going to be a team's number one type of wide receiver. Might have a couple of seasons where he is, but not necessarily be that alpha on a team. Quarterback's kind of lame. Cam Ward's the best one from the U. I think he's the one that's got the best shot to be fantasy relevant from this class. I am not a big Shadur Sanders guy. I actually like Jackson Dart better, and I might even like Jalen Milroe better than Shadur Sanders. Milroe definitely more of a project because his accuracy, especially like short intermediate passes, like how could that be so bad? But his deep ball is so good. I don't know how that happens, but I think he could end up being amazing for fantasy. Whereas I think Shadur could be kind of a bust for fantasy, especially if he goes to New Orleans. That could be a real tough fit. And then a sleeper at quarterback. I like Tyler Shuck, but I don't know if he's ever really going to get a chance to be like a starter for a long period of time. I don't know if any of the other quarterbacks are. Maybe I'll say Milroe is a sleeper. Kyle McCord's okay. But those are probably the quarterbacks that I would talk about. Not that I'm like targeting. I'll target Milroe in Dynasty, but I'm not going to target Shuck or McCord. And obviously it depends on where they land. That goes without saying. And then tight end, Warren is the best tight end. Loveland is right behind him. Arroyo is a good sleeper. I think Ferguson from Oregon is a good sleeper as well. I'm not feeling Fannin from Bowling Green. I think he might be one that's a little bit overrated at tight end.
Well, we'll see what happens. Obviously, landing spot matters. There's a lot of fantasy content, sports content, football content that's coming after the draft because we'll find out where these players get. Draft capital matters, landing spot matters. So lots of football ahead. But before we get out of here, let's dive through some rapid fire questions. I'll just throw out some questions. Let me know what first comes to mind.
Okay.
We'll fly through this. What do you enjoy most about what you're doing in the industry right now?
The draft coverage is absolutely something that I love. And that's going to bleed into the regular season. I'm going to end up watching more film than, I try to watch every game as much as I can. But now I'm probably going to be tasked with definitely watching every game during the football season. So that's going to be challenging, but it's going to be fun.
So exciting.
Mm-hmm.
What's the worst loss you've experienced as a sports fan?
Oh, no. Oh, man. Okay. The only game that's made me cry is the 2003 Fiesta Bowl between Miami and Ohio State. Everybody that's watching who's an Ohio State fan, you'll love this. And everybody who's a Miami fan will sympathize with me. So the Canes are winning late in the fourth quarter. They get called for a really ticky-tack pass interference penalty in the end zone against the Buckeyes. Those Big 12 refs, I think that's what they were. Next thing you know, the Buckeyes tie the game. They go into overtime. Game's still tied. Go into double overtime. Ohio State wins. Canes lose out on their national championship, what would be their sixth national championship, and basically establish those teams, with Ken Dorsey, Andre Johnson, Frank Gore, Vilma, Will Fork, et cetera. The list goes on, as a dynasty in college football. That goes away. It made me cry. And my wife had just met me at the time, and she wasn't sure what she was getting into when she was seeing a grown man cry because his team just lost in the national championship because of some serious BS. That would have to be it.
Heart-wrenching for sure. Now, what's an all-time favorite?
I'm still
sports
pissed
moment?
off, Kevin.
I'm sorry to bring it up. What's your all-time favorite sports moment?
This one's going to be personal for me. A couple years back, the Miami Hurricanes basketball team was better than expected. They had a couple players on the team that were NBA caliber, and they made a run in the tournament, and they made the Elite Eight. And on a lark, my son and I decided to go to their Elite Eight game against Texas. So off we are on 2 days' notice to Kansas City. We figured out where the team was staying, what hotel they were at. We went to the hotel before the game. We saw them walk to the team buses before the game. The Canes band is playing in the lobby of this small boutique hotel in downtown Kansas City. We go to the game. The Canes are down double digits in the second half. They make an epic run to win the game 88-81. I'm there with my son. The Canes are going to the Final Four for the first time ever, and we're there to see it. After the game, Canes players were coming into the stands there weren't a lot of Canes fans there, so they were coming into the stands to, shake hands with Canes fans. We got pictures. We got some of the confetti off the floor, and it was an amazing experience because I got to see my college basketball team make the Final Four for the first time. So history for Miami, and I got to do it with my son. And my son often refers to it as the best day of his life. And it meant everything to me. That day will live on in infamy in the Richard house.
I got chills, man. That's what it's all about. I love that.
Really is. Really is.
What about a favorite TV show?
The Sopranos or The Critic? Have you heard of The Critic?
I've not heard of The Critic. No.
The Critic was not really a spin-off of The Simpsons, but when The Simpsons were popular, Fox was trying to, make another funny cartoon sitcom. And The Critic is what they came up with, where John Lovitz was the lead voice of Jay Sherman, who was a movie critic in New York City. And it just one of the silliest, funniest cartoon shows that was out at the time. Absolutely loved The Critic, and obviously very different from The Simpsons, and certainly didn't last as long as The Simpsons. But those two shows are shows that I really enjoy.
Great. Now, how about a favorite movie and a favorite sports movie?
Favorite movie and a favorite sports movie. I probably saw Billy Madison more than any other movie while I was in college. College kid.
Yeah.
Adam Sandler's funny. Like, it's on every day on our VCR.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm old, dude. And then sports movie, I love Major League, the original Major League. That's awesome movie. Awesome. Fun.
For sure. Right.
Yeah. And it's common. A lot of people say that it's their favorite, but it was great. Great story behind it, even though it was the Indians.
So good. Now, what was your favorite part of growing up in Chicago?
My favorite part of growing up in Chicago? Definitely not the snow. I would say that it might have been just like growing up in the era of Jordan was really special, because a lot of people are fans of Michael Jordan, but they might have only been able to see him play once in person. I got to see him play a bunch in person, and he would do something spectacular every single game. And I saw him in Chicago when the Bulls would play the Heat in Miami. When I was at Miami, I'd go to those games. I saw him in Orlando. I saw him in Houston. No question that Chicago became Jordan's town in the 90s. And that was something that was highly influential, like I said. And that was back when Chicago was a great sports town. Yeah. And Michael really made it that way because the baseball teams weren't winning, and the Bears weren't winning, and the Blackhawks weren't winning. So I think I would lean toward that as like really my favorite part about being in Chicago. The food is great and the people are great. I love Chicagoans, and we're all cut from the same kind of cloth. But that having Michael Jordan representing Chicago was very, very special.
It's a great answer. Now, what's the best part of living in South Florida?
Well, definitely, probably not having any snow. Can you tell that I'm done with that? That's definitely a part of it. There's a ton of culture down here. It's a big melting pot, kind of like the way New York City is. Miami's the same way. You can go to South Beach and have a completely different experience than you would in downtown Miami. And that's a different experience than what you'd get in Fort Lauderdale. And that's a different experience than what you'd get in Delray Beach. There's something for everyone. The beaches are great. The weather's outstanding. That I would probably say that those are the things that make South Florida truly special.
Well, when you're living in paradise, do you even go on vacations? Do you have an all-time favorite vacation you've been on?
Yes, I go on vacation. My wife and I go to Las Vegas every summer. That's my last trip before training camp starts. is going out there to just chill and have a good time and, go on some adventures out there. But we've been to Paris. That was a really good vacation. New York City is always a great time. For our 10-year anniversary, we went to California and, started in San Francisco and worked our way down to LA. That was a good time. Paris was really a good time. If you've ever, I don't know if you've ever been to Paris or
No.
if you're thinking about it, it's different, obviously, completely different country, but there's a lot of interesting things to see and do out there. Maybe my favorite part about it was taking a day trip to the Normandy beaches from World War II history, and oh my God, like amazing experience. That might be the last time I cried, was going to the cemetery out there, the National Cemetery. And hearing them play taps at the end of the day and fold up the flag and all that, like just a must do as an American citizen to go out to Normandy and to witness that part of world history up close and personal.
I can imagine. Now, do you have a travel like bucket list destination?
I want to go back to Europe without a return ticket.
Okay.
So I want to. We'll start in London, and until we're done with London, we'll go to Dublin. Maybe we'll go to Iceland. Hang out in Paris again. Go to Germany. Definitely go to Italy. Go to Greece, and then who the hell knows where we go from there? Do we go to Amsterdam? Kind of see it all and not spend a week or 10 days, but maybe like a month and a half, just going around Europe, checking it out, not necessarily having a plan on when we're definitely leaving and definitely coming home. It's something that I probably should have done when I was a lot younger, but whenever I get the chance to do it, it'll probably be, I'll probably be really old when I do it, but I want to do it.
All right. Well, when it comes to food, is Chicago style pizza, is that the best pizza? What's your opinion on pizza, and what's the best spot in Chicago for pizza?
Okay, so it depends on what type of pizza you're looking for.
Okay.
I will say that there is no such thing as the best pizza, like overall. Like, New York style pizza is great. Chicago style pizza is great. Detroit style pizza is great. They're all different. They've all got their own, kind of flair to it. It's kind of like being a writer in fantasy football. They've all got their unique kind of twist to it. But in Chicago, they've got thin crust pizza. They call it actually you shouldn't call it tavern style pizza, but it's basically thin crust pizza cut into squares.
Okay.
My favorite place is a place called Aurelio's, which is more of like a suburban Chicagoland chain, but it's a very unique taste. They've got sweet sauce instead of your typical tomato sauce. They've got a unique blend of cheeses, but I grew up on it, so maybe that's why I love it as much as I do. But to me, it's fantastic. Aurelio's for thin crust, and then the thicker, more stuffed type of pizza that's more of a casserole than it is a pizza.
Yeah.
Giordano's is my favorite for that, and that's another chain and that started small in Chicagoland and grew a little bit larger. But they're generally good no matter which one you go to. But man, like one or two slices of that and you might be seeing your cardiologist. I mean, that is some seriously greasy stuff.
Heavy stuff.
I love that. Chicago's known for a lot of great food, beef sandwiches, obviously, like any type of steak. It's a gre't culinary town, and you could go to Chicago on vacation and do nothing but eat. Come back home, as fat as an offensive lineman or something, but you'll have had a good time because Chicago treated you well with the food, and the pizza is no exception.
I love it. Now, one last question on the football front. 1991 Miami Hurricanes, 1991 Washington Huskies, co-national championships. Growing up, I was obviously a Husky fan in the Seattle area. Mm-hmm. If those two teams faced each other, who would have won?
Who do you think would have won? Well, I know what you're going to say. I would say it like this. Which team won more games by 3+ touchdowns? Which team had more players go into the NFL? Like the Miami Hurricanes team back then had Warren Sapp as a backup.
Wow.
Okay. That's how that there were a bunch of NFL defenders on that team.
Yeah.
Gino Toretto was the quarterback. He didn't end up being, so great in the NFL, but he was great in college. That was a great college team. I would guess that the Canes won more games in blowout fashion. Both teams were undefeated, if I recall.
Yeah,
I know
good
Miami.
squad. Yeah. Huskies had their defense, obviously, was like Steve Entman, and I mean,
Sure. Yeah,
great squad. But
Lincoln Kennedy might beat me up for saying Miami over the Huskies, but it's Miami. They would have been the better team.
love it. Well, great answers for sure. Before we wrap things up, can you just name a few of the people that have had a big impact on you during your journey in the fantasy sports industry?
A few. You said a few.
I mean, whatever.
I mean, I'm not going to take an hour and name everybody,
Yeah.
but I wouldn't have even gotten the chance to write about football if it wasn't for a woman named Ellen Levy, who was the managing editor of NFL.com back in the early 2000s. Couldn't have done this without her. Gil Brandt, who is there's a bunch of NFL people, but Gil is the one who helped me the most and basically gave me a master's course in football, especially from the front office side of things. I was his ghostwriter for 3.5 years at NFL.com. Marv Levy was a big part of my development. Pat Kerwin was a big part of my development. I worked with those guys a lot at NFL.com. I couldn't have done it without them. I was hired to CBS from the NFL by a guy named Peter Madden. He was my managing editor for a long time, and he didn't pull any punches, so he's an important part. My editor now is a guy named RJ White, who's kind of the same way as Peter. Like, he'll tell it like it is, but also very, very supportive and full of great ideas. And he lets me be me. So he's been just as big of a part of my career as anybody else. Thank you for asking that. That's a quick trip down memory lane.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's just a lot of great people that help people along the way, and it's always great to give them their flowers. Obviously, when it comes to just what you're grateful for, what is it you're most grateful for at this time?
Man, I'm grateful that I've been able to work for CBS in some form, whether it's for pro wrestling or fantasy football or the NFL draft, for 25 years. I mean, we're talking more than half my life. I've been employed by one company. And like I said, like, they're the ones that put food on the table and help me pay my mortgage each month. Like, there's no doubt that I'm grateful for that company, but I'm eternally grateful for the family that I have. My son's amazing. My daughter's amazing. My wife is triple amazing because she puts up with the three of us. Supportive parents that I'm lucky that they're both still alive. Supportive in-laws, supportive family, great support group of friends. And obviously I work with some of the sharpest people in fantasy football that force me to stay sharp myself. I can't slack off because I'll look like an ass compared to Jamie and Heath and, yes, even Adam. So I'm grateful to work with those guys. I'm grateful for everybody that helps me do what I do at CBS. We've got a great research department. We have a whole crew that works on all of our content, and we have a whole streaming channel, CBS Sports HQ. And so when we go on that, it's not like somebody flicks a switch and we're streaming on the internet, where it takes dozens of people to make that work. And I'm grateful that they're all a part. I feel really lucky to have gotten to where I'm at, because it all started from writing a goofy wrestling column. Amazing. Way back in the day for nothing. And, someone fortuitously finding my resume and saying, this guy's going to be good for this job. And that was the foot in the door. And I guess I'm pretty grateful for fantasy football, because without it, I don't know what I'd be doing. I really don't. I don't think I'd be anywhere close to where I am without fantasy football actually being a thing.
Well, I love it. Great stuff, Dave. It was an honor to have you on this show. Can you share with the listeners and viewers where to find you?
CBSSports.com is where I've been hacking away at the 2025 NFL draft. Would love it if people would read the draft profiles I've written. And if they disagree with anything that I say, reach out to me. Tell me it's okay. And, we can have a conversation about it. Maybe you think I'm crazy for not loving Shedeur Sanders. You can read my opinion on why I don't think Shedeur is going to be a great quarterback, or why I'm more nervous about him. He could easily be a great quarterback, but I'm nervous about him. And same thing for fantasy content year round. If you love podcasts or if you love YouTube, you can find Fantasy Football Today on both of those platforms. Literally just search for Fantasy Football Today and it will come up, and you will be a better fantasy football manager for it.
There you go. Well, thank you so much for joining me on this episode. Such a pleasure, such a thrill, and I can't wait to see what's next for you in 2025. Can't wait to see you at the Kings Classic, hopefully this year.
Yes, can't wait for that. That's always a great time, Kevin.
Thank you for listening to the Fantasy Football Unlimited podcast. Until next time, be sure to follow and subscribe to all of FFU's social media accounts for daily content.